Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. You heard me, Arthur. You just need to sign the papers, and everything is ready. My wife Annie, whom I have been married to for over 25 years, was talking to me. I tried to listen, but her voice got further and further away as her tirade against me continued. It all started this afternoon when I came home from work. She was sitting at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression on her face. But unfortunately, she only had one glass for her, and she drank from it. Due to the fact that the conversation was escalating into a difficult one, she didn't think that I might like it or, given the way the conversation was going, I might need a drink too. I knew it would be bad when I sat down. She didn't ask how my day was. She just let me know right away that she was leaving me. Annie found her soulmate, someone who made her heart sing in a way I never could, and I wasn't good enough for her anymore. It was hard for me to hear her. The problem was that as her voice got louder, it sounded quieter and quieter to me. Our story was pretty typical. Annie and I met in high school and stayed together. Our daughter Sally was born about 6 months after we got married. She wasn't the main reason we got married, but it was on the agenda. We both had good jobs today. Even though we weren't rich, I would say we belonged to the upper middle class. We had already paid for the house a few years ago, and we had a decent savings account. We often said that we loved each other, spent family vacations regularly, and although we didn't have as much love as when we first got married, we still did it on average a couple of times a week. I thought we loved each other deeply, and I would say that we would grow old together, until today. Annie was still ranting. Her face flushed as she continued to tell me what was going on. Arthur, look at me. It was getting hard for me to concentrate, but I turned my head towards her. You have to sign these papers. She kept pointing at the documents in front of me. Her voice was demanding, but it was hard for me to concentrate. It was as if the light and colors in the room had faded, although the kitchen light was on. Mentally, I was upset, but my body didn't react, and the longer I didn't react, the more enraged Annie became. The last thing I can remember is Annie slapping me. I didn't feel the impact. I just thought it would leave a big red mark on my face. But then again, I couldn't move, and the world continued to sink into darkness. Sally. It was a long day. Classes at the university were postponed because there was an accident, the electricity disappeared, and we were dismissed to our homes. I couldn't figure out what was going on when I got home. The house was eerily quiet. The lights were on. My father's car was there, but my mother's was not. When I entered the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on a chair. Dad was sitting at the table. He didn't move, just stared into space. On the other side of the table was an open bottle of Mom's wine and an almost empty glass. There was a stack of papers in front of Dad with a lot of "sign here" signs. I went up to Dad and touched his shoulder from behind. "Hi, Dad." I expected him to turn around, but he didn't react. I walked around and looked at his face, and I couldn't help but gasp. His eyes had glazed over, becoming almost milky white, and it seemed that tears used to flow from his eyes, but he did not blink. A trickle of saliva was coming out of his mouth, which began to drip onto his lap. I felt panic. Dad, wake up, Dad." I couldn't help but cry. After a minute, Dad still didn't answer. I knew I had to calm down. I said to myself, "Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help." I pulled out my phone and called the emergency service. I made it clear to them that I couldn't get my father, Arthur Smith, to answer. They asked me about my details and address, and I told them my name, Sally Smith, and our home address. They sent an ambulance, informing me that it would arrive in about 10 minutes. For the next few minutes, I sat looking at Dad and holding his hand. I spoke to him quietly, letting him know that everything would be fine. This man gave me everything when I was growing up. He worked a lot, but he was always present at my school events, musicals, and ballet. When I was just learning to play the violin, he suffered from screeching in my ears for hour after hour, always encouraging me. Finally, he saved enough money to buy me a Heidersign violin for my 16th birthday. It was not bad, not the best, but it was better than my other training violins. 5 years later, I was at university, studying music with an emphasis on strings and violin. I had 2 better violins, but this one held a special place in my heart, as it was inherited from my dad. I didn't know what to do while I was waiting. Why was Dad like that? What happened? And I had no idea where Mom was. It was then that I looked at the documents, and the words divorce petition caught my eye. What the fuck? I read the first page of the document in a couple of minutes, and my skin crawled. For some reason I don't understand, Mom wanted to divorce Dad. It seemed very likely that Dad's condition was caused by these documents, and judging by the way Mom's wine was opened, she gave Dad the documents and left him. People often wonder how emotions change so quickly. I suppose this has never happened to them before. As for me, I felt that all the compassion and desire to be with my mother had died. A little later, an ambulance arrived. They put Dad on a gurney and took him to the hospital. I was following after I locked the house, so I started calling on the way. I called my grandmother, my dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend. Then I called his manager at work to tell him that Dad would be away for a while. I told them that I came home and found him unresponsive and on his way to the hospital. Everyone asked me to keep them informed of his condition, and his manager told me that he would arrange an emergency vacation for Dad and inform their boss about it. I knew I was postponing the next call because I was so mad at her, but I decided I needed to call my mom. The phone rang, and she answered it after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my dear. How was your day?" "Wow, just wow." Of course, my mom wasn't naive enough to think that I wouldn't know what was going on. It's been almost an hour since I walked into the house and found Dad. Mom knew my schedule, and it was clear to her by the time that I was already at home and found out everything. "Where are you, Mom?" "I left your father." She fell silent, not wanting to say anything. I could feel her hesitation. "So, in other words, you just destroyed my father, your husband, and left him without caring about it?" "Oh no, honey. I tried to explain to your father about Paul and what was going on, but he didn't react. So I thought it was better to leave and let him realize that we won't be together with him anymore." She tried to talk like it was easy, however. Finding Dad like me, it was more than likely that she just ripped out his heart and threw it into the wall while he was watching, if my guess was correct. "You left him when he needed help. Are you really that heartless? Do you know what's going on right now? Or don't you care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Honey, don't be angry right now. I know it's a little shocking, but your dad's going to be fine. I will only ask for what belongs to me, as well as for some support while Paul waits to marry me." Yes, my mother lost touch with reality. "Angry? You haven't seen me angry yet, Mom. And just so you know, I'm on my way to pick up Dad at the hospital right now. He's in the ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my dear. I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No fucking buts, Mom. Let me ask you, is this floor you're going to? Is this the same floor from your job that you've been talking about all along?" She hesitated. "Yes, dear. Paul was the person at my mother's job that she never shut up about. So, as I understand it, he's a dozen years younger than you. And how long have you been having an affair with him?" She hesitated again. 6 months. "So you've been making love to someone from your job behind your father's back for the last 6 months. You lied to Dad and me, hiding the connection with your fool. I had no idea you were a fucking fool, Mom, and obviously Dad was too, judging by the state you just left him in. How the hell could you think that any of us would be happy about this?" "Well, I suppose not at first, but as soon as we live with Paul, you'll realize that we're made for each other." "We." She just mentioned it in the plural for the second time. Did she really think that I would leave Dad to move in with her and her bastard boyfriend? I felt like I was boiling with anger. I knew I'd say something stupid if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I tell you something that I may not be able to take back, but let me be completely clear. I'm not going to move away from Dad, and damn it, there's no way I'm going to go near Paul, let alone get close to his house where you're screwing with him. Sally Smith. "Stop it," she shouted. "I'm your mother, and you're not going to talk to me like that, even though you're upset." "Then I think we're done talking." And I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I was going to condone what she was doing, then she was crazy. She tried to call me back a few times, then she started calling Dad's phone, which was stupid, because even if he had it, I doubt he would have answered her call. I had Dad's phone, so I ignored all her calls. By the time I got to the hospital, the ambulance crew had hospitalized Dad, and he was in the ward under observation. Aunt Rhonda showed up and let me know that she had also received several calls from my mother, but wasn't sure what was going on other than that her brother was in the hospital. When I explained what had happened, Aunt Rhonda blushed so much that I could almost see steam coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that this fool left for my brother?" "Of course, Aunt Rhonda here." Besides being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family lawyer. So for the next hour, we sat next to Dad while Rhonda read the documents and made notes, cursing under her breath from time to time. Doctors and nurses periodically came in and out of the room, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to divorce your father." The schedule outlined here shows that this has been going on for more than 2 months and should have been filed this week. Otherwise, it would have cost her much more than her legal team's fees. I shrugged. I got all the excuses my mother could give me. Because of what she did, I didn't want Dad to be with her anymore. It was weird. I've never been a daddy's daughter. I've always looked up to my mom, but her act was just disgusting. Paul, her soulmate, did it. No matter what, Mom and Dad shouldn't be together anymore. Rhonda continued. The good news is that she has hired a rogue lawyer to represent her. She would have to pay him a lot just for the divorce and a lot more if the case went to court. She grinned at me. While my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's going to get a 100% family discount. We smiled at each other for the first time that evening. Besides, some of the claims here, where she wants 50% of the money in the house and 60% of the financial assets, plus the maintenance of a spouse and the maintenance of a child, are most likely quite ridiculous. Am I going to assume from your reaction that you're not going to live with your mother? I shook my head negatively. All right. I have some initial thoughts, but we need to see what happens to your father over the next 24 hours. Your mother may already have problems because she left him and her mental cruelty. The next few days flew by unnoticed. Doctors constantly checked on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he just didn't react. I was studying in a hospital chair by the bed with a laptop and a textbook in my hands. From time to time, someone from the family would come in to give me a break, and I would go home, sleep for a few hours, change my clothes, and come back. I admit, I cried a lot when I was alone in the house. One of the big surprises was that the owner of the company where Dad worked came to check on him. Although I knew his manager, Tom, I had never met his real boss. Surprise. It was a woman. Tina Williams was an amazing woman, sensual, slender, with tan skin, dark raven hair and blue eyes that, I could tell, burned, making any living man and probably some women faint. It turns out that my father was one of the group at his job that was next to Tina a few years ago when she went through an unpleasant divorce. Her cheating ex-husband tried to take her daughter and most of their savings away from her, and almost got half of her business before Dad introduced her to Aunt Rhonda. Rhonda reversed everything, saving Tina from having to give away any part of her business and ensuring that Tina received alimony for their then 6-year-old daughter. Tina came several times and was stunned when I told her in general terms what had happened and why he was here in the hospital. She brought postcards from everyone at Dad's job, sat, held his hand, and told him stories from work that happened while he was away. It turns out that my father was the life of the company in the office, and everyone missed his antics. I must inform you that Dad is an accountant by profession and works for one of the financial companies that help banks process payments to financial institutions. It can be a tedious job, but apparently my dad makes the workday a little brighter for everyone. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I had just returned from home. When I entered the room, Rhonda and Tina were finishing their conversation. I could tell it was a little hot, but their anger was directed at my mother, not at each other. My mom wrote Tina a letter demanding to give her access to all Dad's bonuses over the past few years. It didn't matter that the money had already been paid. The letter required her to receive 50% of them to the specified bank account within 30 days. Otherwise, she would sue Tina. Apart from the stupidity of the demand for money already paid, it seems that she and her new beau are short of cash, since I have frozen all their joint assets while Arthur is being treated, Rhonda said with a very predatory grin on her face. I laughed, announcing my presence. Yes, this morning I received my first message from my mom in 2 weeks, a text message asking me to give her money. I didn't answer because I'm still very upset about her actions. I mean, she hasn't asked about Dad once since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina has become very worried about my father's offense. Whenever my mother was mentioned, her eyes narrowed and her voice dropped an octave, indicating her deep dislike for her. It was almost as if I could see flames appearing at the edges of those burning eyes. I just hoped that she would never have to sit in the room with my mother. I was afraid that she might burn it to the ground. I may not love my mother very much now, but she was still my mother. She destroyed the most wonderful person. Sally, if it wasn't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarissa or my business. A lot of office staff helped me during one of the most difficult moments in my life, but your father spent a lot of time listening to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me. He just let me talk. No one has ever really done this without expressing their opinion. He introduced me to your aunt, making sure I was being looked after. If he was a single man, I would have pursued him with everything I had after the divorce. I shrugged and let a smile light up my face. Well, he's going to be a single man soon. This brought awareness to their faces. Rhonda giggled and Tina smiled. Thank you, Sally. I needed it. I still can't believe what your mother did to him, or that she rejected such a wonderful man. I have to go to the office, but first I'll do it. Tina came up to my father and, while Rhonda and I were watching, leaned over and kissed him gently but sincerely on the lips. She looked at us and smiled, but her smile turned to shock a moment later when my dad groaned. Arthur. When I woke up, I felt soft lips on mine, just the right pressure, and behind them was a sensual and gentle intention that conveyed an affection I hadn't felt in a long time. I could hear the beeping of medical devices and my moaning when almost every muscle in my body ached. I expected Annie to be standing over my bed when I opened my eyes after such a gentle kiss, but Tina was standing there with a smile on her face. Tina? Sally and Rhonda came over from the other side of the bed. It's all right, Daddy. You're going to be fine. Do you hear? My memories caught up with me a moment later, and I realized that Annie was leaving me or, more likely, had already left me. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them brought me up to date on how Sally discovered that I wasn't responding to anything and called an ambulance, how she found divorce papers saying that Annie had been cheating on me for months. I found out how Annie threatened Tina as soon as Rhonda blocked our finances until they found out what was happening to me. How long? 2 weeks, Arthur, Rhonda replied. I looked at Tina. Tina, did you kiss me? Tina blushed. Yes, I'm sorry. I was going back to the office and saying goodbye. I smiled. No, it's all right. I'm already on the market, so I think it's okay. Over the next few hours, I was examined by many doctors. Examinations, blood tests, MRI. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed here, as did Rhonda and Sally. There was a psychologist among the doctors who came to see me. I told him how I came home and found Annie drinking alone, and she told me she was leaving me. Then, I told him, when she began to intensify the onslaught, the world began to lose color. The light and sound were disappearing, and it was difficult for me to move, even though I wanted to. I had the last memory of Annie hitting me in the face and screaming at me, but I couldn't understand her words. All the girls gasped in unison when they found out that Annie was beating me up, while I couldn't answer. Dad, what time do you think it happened? I'd say it was about 5:30, baby. Why would you want to know that? Because it was after 7:30 when I came home and found you. So I guess Mom must have left you there alone for quite a while. A psychologist intervened. It's not unusual for someone in your situation to be abused while they're not responding. And in your case, I would say that you went into some shock when you heard your wife's statement that she was leaving you. Of course, this is a much more extreme case than we usually observe, but it makes sense. Rhonda spoke up. When Arthur was little, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite often, and one day one of the parents in the neighborhood found Arthur lying on the ground in the park. From what our parents told me, they put him to bed and he woke up the next morning. No one ever thought about it, since the next day he woke up at the same time as usual. But it really happened. I nodded. I remember Billy pushing me and teasing me in the park. After a while, I don't remember what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me that I had lost consciousness, and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they went and talked to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think it was sincere, but after that day, he never bothered me again. Well, I think we may have some repetition here, the psychologist said. In many ways, the mind is still poorly understood. However, if something like this has happened before, it makes sense that it could happen again. I frowned. He smiled. I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these three lovely ladies, even if something happens again, I think you will be well taken care of. We talked for a few more minutes before he excused himself and left. I also felt tired, which may seem strange to someone who has been sleeping for the last 2 weeks, but I am tired. So I sent all three girls home to rest for a while and told them they could visit me tomorrow and make sure I was okay. The next 2 days brought me back to life. Tina brought me a work laptop and gave me some simple tasks that needed to be done, just so that I could do something. Rhonda stopped by first to show me the corrected divorce papers and get me to sign some documents so she could get to work on ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill questioned me for over an hour about what I went through that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that we would receive her report in a few days. I wasn't sure if we were filing a complaint against Annie. In the end, Rhonda told me to leave it all to her, kissed me on the forehead, and left. In the afternoon of the second day, after I woke up after that, I was released, as Sally said, discharged from the hospital so that I could return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised when Tina met us at the exit of the building and helped Sally escort me to her large SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We ordered a takeaway, she helped clean up, and then stayed with us for a couple of hours to watch TV. When she was about to leave, Sally hugged her, and then made sure I walked her to her car. Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done in the last few weeks. I do not know how I can repay you, I said. Well, in a few weeks, when you feel at ease again, you can invite me to dinner and dancing. She laughed. I blushed. Just today I came out of the hospital in the afternoon, and the woman whose kiss woke me up asked me out on a date that evening. But she was pretty, and I was going to be a bachelor again soon. Okay, next Friday night after work. It will give me almost 2 weeks to get back to normal. She nodded, came over and hugged me tightly. It lingered a little longer, and I felt more of a hidden meaning. When she got into her car, it seemed funny to me that for a moment I wondered what the name of that strange woman to whom I had been married for almost 25 years was. Over the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina fussed over me again, checking to see if I was okay. It was nice to be taken care of so much. However, the news that Rhonda brought me caught us all a little off guard that Friday afternoon. So Annie was arrested this afternoon, she said. What happened? I asked. Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, a warrant was issued for Annie's arrest based on mental cruelty towards a person with disabilities. This is based on the fact that you were immobilized at the time and couldn't defend yourself. Add to this the fact that she left you unattended and without help for an unknown period of time, and she will be in big trouble. What does this mean for a divorce? Tina asked, who had joined us for dinner again. Her 8-year-old daughter Clarice was with her that evening. Clarice was watching a Disney movie in the living room while we were talking. I was returning to work on Monday, so Tina was supposed to meet me there, but I was starting to realize that she needed something more than just efficient calculation of numbers in the office. I found myself imagining what was hidden under those beautiful tight-fitting clothes that she wore every time she came to visit. Rhonda smiled. It will probably mean that some things will go in Arthur's favor. Judging by the state of the bank accounts and the house, I insist on a 50-50th split. I know we could have done more after everything that happened. However, I suppose Arthur will want to be fair? I nodded. Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she was trying to get from you. Tina, I've filed a case against her for extortion, except for the charge of mental cruelty. It won't do much except stop her from touching what doesn't belong to her. Most likely, she will come out in a couple of days not at all battered and will be able to return to her piggy soulmate. What I want to do is quickly settle the divorce using Arthur's visit to the hospital. Then I have plans depending on how she reacts. I will make sure that nothing superfluous is taken away from Arthur, she smiled. So, how long will the divorce take? Aunt Rhonda? Sally asked. I believe that everything is going well. It should take about 3 months. If Annie wants to fight something, I'll use the big guns, and it will take longer, but it will cause her a lot more pain. That evening, as I walked Tina to the car, Sally helped Clarissa into the back seat. Tina hugged me again and surprised me with a short kiss, reminding me how I woke up the other day. Arthur, I know you're married and you're an honest man, so I'm not going to rush it too much. But I want to claim you now and let you know that I want you. Of course, I've wanted you for a long time, but I would never harass a married man or break someone's marriage vows. It happened to me, and I don't want it to happen to anyone else, even if their marriage is falling apart. I looked into her deep blue eyes for a moment, brushed a lock of her raven-colored dark hair away from her face before bending down to kiss her. But instead of a soft and gentle kiss, I let that kiss be passionate for maybe 30 seconds. I knew we both felt a connection. Tina's eyes were closed when I pulled away, and her tongue ran over her lips, enjoying our kiss. I grinned at him. This is so that you know that I confirm your rights. We turned to look at the girls, both of them giggling as they watched us kiss. Clarissa was clapping her hands, and Sally had a big shit grin on her face. When Tina and Clarissa pulled out of the driveway, Sally hugged me and we waved to them. The next few months turned into something of a roller coaster. On the one hand, Annie wanted the divorce to be quick. On the other hand, she wasn't happy with this arrangement. It looks like Paul was driving and telling her that she should get the lion's share of the assets. He was feeding her all sorts of nonsense, and on some level she should have known that after so many years of marriage. As the settlement demands became more and more ridiculous, Rhonda called Annie's lawyer once, and although I do not know what was said, all objections to the settlement stopped overnight. Tina and I met every Friday night, while Sally started babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time to have dinner, drink coffee, watch a show, or go dancing. Of course, we've never done anything more than hold hands and kiss, but I had a feeling that there would be something different the night my divorce took place. I went back to work, and we were doing well. As a financial organization, we made good profits, but we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, we were well paid for it, and, as a rule, we had a good time together as a group. I think the staff realized that at some point Tina and I were becoming a couple. Although everyone was happy for both of us, I had to tone down my usual antics. My immediate manager, who reported to Tina, made sure that no one talked about our behavior in the workplace, since I practically met with his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized in a week, starting next Thursday. There was no trial, but Annie asked for a meeting to talk before the final ruling. I agreed the day before, and we agreed that she would come to the house to see Sally and me. I took the afternoon off and cooked lamb chops and dumplings and sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite of all three of us, and I hoped it would make evening conversations a little less awkward. Sally got home around 5:30 and went to take a shower and change. Then, shortly before 6, the doorbell rang and Annie was standing at the front door. So, I haven't described Annie all this time, but maybe I'll do it now. Before everything collapsed a few months ago, Annie was an attractive housewife in her mid-40s. She had shoulder-length brown hair cut short, a curvy mom figure, and although she weighed a few pounds more than she wanted, she was still very attractive. With a great bust and a matching ass, she was a gorgeous-looking woman. But unfortunately, the woman standing in front of me was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a lot of weight. She had chins and big chubby cheeks. Her belly, which had always been a little bulging, now hung over her trousers, and that curvy mom's ass, which I loved, swelled beyond recognition. Moreover, she was wearing baggy clothes that hid her thickness. I don't mind overweight women, but it wasn't Annie. I think my shock at her body showed on my face. Annie grimaced, but didn't say anything. Hi, Annie, please come in. We went into the kitchen and I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted. We chatted about nothing for a few minutes. She asked about my job and if I was taking care of myself. I asked her about her job and didn't bother to comment on how she looked after herself. That's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we worked on getting me to gain weight. She mentioned an unspoken question. I frowned. I have loved this woman for more than 25 years. And yet, despite what she had done to me, I was still worried about her health. You don't approve, do you? She looked at me. No, Annie, I do not know. When we were together, you were in a beautiful, slim condition and healthy. But to be honest, I'm shocked by your appearance. You don't look well, and if it wasn't so painful for me from what you did, I would be very worried about your health and would try to help you. But you don't care, do you? Her face fell. You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here. Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and pretty much left me to die. I shrugged, and she sighed. I deserve it. I did a terrible thing, didn't I? Sally had just emerged from the shower. You did a damn terrible thing. You single-handedly tore a happy family apart and then walked out the door without caring about anything in the world, and I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight. Sally, calm down. Your mother knows what our situation is and how unhappy we all are. Coming here must have been difficult for her. She asked for this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do was be adults and listen to her. Sally was not happy. As far as I understood, she, like me, had not spoken to her mother since that fateful day. Judging by the way my daughter looked at her mother, it's not going to end well for anyone. It's time to change the subject. I tried to seem happy. Difficult conversations are not good on an empty stomach, so let's eat first. So I served dinner. No one said a word, but there were a lot of glances at each other at the table. Sally just stared at her mother the whole time. After dinner, I cleared the table, and Annie asked me to talk to Sally alone first. No way, damn it. You can tell me whatever you want in front of both of us. I was surprised, but I could see that Sally was determined not to be alone with her mother. I think Annie saw it too. The look in her eyes was exactly like her mother's when she did this to me that fateful night. She nodded. Annie took a deep breath. She didn't want to do it in front of me, but she looked at Sally. Well, Sally, I wanted to ask you to forgive me for what I did that night. I thought it all out wrong, and no matter what, I don't want to be separated from my daughter forever. Annie looked at me. There's something else, but I'd rather say it in private than in front of your father. I'm sorry, Mom, but if you can't say this to both of us, then I don't want to hear it. With that, before Annie could do anything else, Sally got up and left. A moment later, we heard her bedroom door slam. I wanted it to go better, Annie said quietly, more to herself than to me. I think it went pretty well, all things considered, I replied to her, making it clear that I had heard her. Really? Yes, indeed, I sighed. Annie, you have to understand that right now everyone living in this house doesn't like you very much. She was about to answer, and I raised my hand. Let me finish and state this for you. First of all, you had a long-term love affair with some fool. Then you hid it from both Sally and me. Then, unexpectedly for me, you hand me the divorce papers, and when I suffered a blow and was speechless, you scream and then slap me in the face. Annie looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Yes, I still have memories of most of that confrontation until you hit me the first time. Now let's get on with it. Then at some point you walk away from me when I'm not responding and leave me there until Sally comes home and finds me in a state of insanity. Annie looked scared now. When Sally calls you, you show absolutely no concern for me when your daughter is clearly worried about her father. You've never asked about my health before tonight. You're making unreasonable demands on my employer, and when you come in here, it's still just about you. You ask Sally to forgive you, but you've never once said you're sorry to her. I paused just for a moment to see if it would reach her. Yes, Annie, I think that after all that was said, everything went really well. Annie was looking at the floor now, and there were tears in her eyes. They hadn't hit the floor yet, but they were about to. I didn't know if they were for Sally, for me, or if they were just still about her. I continued. So, our divorce will be final tomorrow, and if you have nothing else to say, then I think we have fulfilled your request for a last meeting. I went to the door and opened it. Annie looked at me and left. When she crossed the threshold, she turned and looked at me. Arthur, we really had some good years, didn't we? Yes, Annie. Most of our time together has been amazing. You were a wonderful lover, a caring wife, and a loving mother. I do not know what that fool Paul did to you, but I do not see anything of the woman I fell in love with in the man standing in front of me. All I see is a lost creature that has been manipulated by someone to gain extra weight like a pig, become selfish, and not care about the people around them. She was looking at her feet again. You really mean it, don't you, Arthur? Yes. She turned to leave, then turned around one last time. This time she looked broken. Arthur, about the house and the money, Paul told me that I should ask. So that was the point of this visit. It wasn't about reuniting with her family. It was just for the money. I laughed bitterly, and Annie looked at me, wondering why I was laughing. Go and tell your soulmate that tomorrow at the same time you will receive your part of the savings and capital that was in this house to the bank account that your lawyer gave to Rhonda. And Annie, she looked at me. I warn you, take care of this money from the floor, otherwise you won't have it for long. The next morning brought the final decree. Annie and I were no longer husband and wife. There was a small part of me that was sad, but it was a very small part. Mostly I was happy. The last few months have not been easy for anyone. Now I was free, and at 48 I still had a lot of life in me. Rhonda called me and told me that the pizza would be on her account at my house tonight. Sally dropped by the office for lunch. We talked about her mother, about happier times when we were a family. I know she didn't love her mother very much, but I know she missed the woman she used to be. To be honest, me too. We had a lot of good years together. Well, I think there was a signal between Sally and Tina when Sally left, because less than 5 minutes later I was called into Tina's office, and she slammed the door and then kissed me like the sun would never rise again. Although, I have to admit that maybe I kissed her back the same way. May I declare that you are mine now, Arthur? I felt a sore spot on my neck where there may or may not be a hickey when she kissed my neck a minute ago. I think you might have already done that. Dinner that night was great. Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarissa were with me, and we celebrated my freedom from Annie. That same Friday night, when the girls were in bed, Tina and I ended our platonic relationship. I must have done everything right, because for the rest of the weekend, every time she sat down, she squeaked slightly, as if she was in a little pain, but her smoldering eyes burned with a flame that I knew was meant only for me. 6 months later, we got married in a beautiful little ceremony at a local lake, attended by many people from work. We'd like to get married later. However, we wanted to make it before Sally and Clarissa's little brother was born. It was 5 years later. Sally, her boyfriend, Tina, and I had just sat down to dinner at one of our local restaurants when 5-year-old Keegan asked, "Dad, who is this lady who stares at us all the time?" We all turned around and saw Annie sitting across from us. She lost a lot of weight. She was staring at us intently and didn't look pleased with herself. We haven't seen or heard from her since we got divorced. She never even tried to contact Sally. I apologized to the family and approached her. "Hi, Annie. How are you doing?" She looked down at the chicken salad she was eating. "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me that I was his soulmate, and you were nothing. But when I didn't get the money up front, he convinced me to gain weight because he loved me and loved overweight women. When I got the money after the divorce, you told me not to give it to him, but I didn't listen. He spent it in a couple of months, and then he left me and disappeared, never marrying me. I was still upset about her, but her story didn't have a happy ending like mine. Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he destroyed and get back to who I used to be." She choked back tears and looked at me. After all these years, that look of hers was the look of the Annie I used to know. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. I treated you like dirt. I did it because I was convinced that Paul knows everything that you don't. I left the only man who ever really loved me, and—" She stopped and grabbed the edge of the table. "You could have died because of what I did. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to say that I am very sorry." Surprisingly, Sally came over and stood next to me. She also heard her mother's apologies. I looked at her, and she smiled wearily at me and grabbed my hand. I do not know, perhaps it was the first time she saw that her mother was sincerely sorry. Her gaze softened, and she held out her hand to her mother. Seeing Sally standing there and then holding out her hand, Annie panicked and tried to get up and leave. But Sally blocked her way. "Mom, stop it. You don't have to go anywhere." Sally slid into the booth next to Annie, and I sat on the other side. I looked at Tina and saw her nod. So for the next hour, mother and daughter talked. There were a lot of reconciliations, there were quite a lot of tears, but for once they were useful, not harmful. As soon as they had finished talking, Sally and I took Annie to the table and introduced her to everyone else. I could tell that Annie was very upset when she was introduced to Keegan as Annie's aunt. After that day, we kind of let Annie back into our lives. Sally was slowly reconnecting with her mother. They had coffee every week or two. The trust between them grew slowly, but it grew nonetheless. When Sally got married, Annie really got the role of the bride's mother. Tina invited Annie to our house for dinner from time to time, and at first, I think it was to spite Annie for everything she refused, and Tina won by marrying me. However, although they were never close, Tina and Annie had some kind of strange friendship that I never understood. Rhonda never forgave Annie for what she did to me, although she was always polite to her when they came into contact. And well, with Tina's blessing, Annie and I did a little postmarital counseling. We have discussed many of our problems since that time, more than 5 years ago. The consultant thought that Annie might have had hormonal problems. However, Annie did not admit it. No, that day I threw away the most important thing for me. I had a husband who loved me and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify the way I systematically destroyed all the good things in my life for the sake of some asshole whispering sweet nothings in my ear. She smiled sweetly at me with this statement. Arthur and Sally deserved much better from me. She began to cry, and then wiped her tears with a napkin. It took 5 years before I was able to reconnect, 5 years that I lost and was not with them. I thank God every day that Arthur allowed me to return to his life. And Tina, too. She blushed at the admission. She had every right to hate me, but she treated me warmly every time we met. No, she was lucky. She got everything I threw away, and I will pay for it for the rest of my life. Annie got a lot more benefit from these sessions than I did. It was helpful to confirm that neither Sally nor I had done anything to make Annie leave us. And she was right. Tina picked us up and made a much stronger family out of us. As they say, people pay for their mistakes if they commit them long enough, which is what Paul did. He moved to another state and tried to steal a married woman and her money again. But this time the husband caught Paul with his wife and turned him into a eunuch. The husband got 10 years, but it looks like he will be released soon, if the rumors from Rhonda, who now represented his interests, are true. Tina and I still love each other very much. I never thought that I would ever be able to love as much and as deeply as I loved Annie. But Tina proved that this is not the case. Tina not only gave me her love, but also gave her whole soul without a trace. We still work at her company, and I'm still at the same job. We have our ups and downs, but we never let anything get in the way of communication when it's important. Her body is still outstanding, and we often make love. We even made love in some exotic places during the holidays. Usually one look is enough, and I lock the bedroom door and make love to her. One day we had just finished making love, showered and dressed, and when we came into the kitchen, we found Sally and Annie talking. Last month, we found out that Sally was expecting a baby, so there was a commotion in the room when the girls were planning the arrival of my first grandchild. My God, Sally, the way they're acting. You'd think these two were teenagers. Tina, you have to tell me what you're feeding Arthur. Maybe I can get some of this to feed Fred. All the girls laughed, and I blushed. Annie had been dating a little lately, but nothing serious until Fred showed up. Mom, leave them alone. We all know that Dad has been a man on a mission ever since. Since when, honey? Annie asked. You know, her eyes sparkled with a slight mischief. I think Dad's libido has grown 3 steps since he came to his senses after he was discharged from the hospital and from his previous life. Annie drooped and fell silent. Sally laughed, and Tina blushed. As for me, I just leaned back in my chair, grinned at my girls, and felt myself getting aroused again looking at Tina. Then I got up and wandered back to the bedroom. Tina followed me a moment later, locking the bedroom door behind her. Well, yes, he checked out, for sure.